The Seattle morning rain transformed downtown streets into liquid obsidian mirrors, reflecting the city's towering glass monuments like a scene from Blade Runner. Through this urban canyon, a machine worth more than most people's lifetime earnings carved its path with surgical precision, until fate decided to remind its driver that even billionaires couldn't negotiate with physics. Harrison Blackthorne's limited edition McLaren P1, one of only 375 ever crafted, hit standing water at precisely 47 miles per hour. The vehicle's computer systems, more sophisticated than NASA's latest spacecraft, calculated 1,000 variables per millisecond, but couldn't account for the one element money couldn't purchase: destiny. The screech of carbon ceramic brakes against rain-slicked asphalt created a symphony of mechanical anguish that ricocheted off surrounding skyscrapers like Phantom of the Opera's climactic crescendo. The orange and black automotive masterpiece executed 3 perfect pirouettes before its grand finale: a collision with Jenny's Gourmet Dreams, a modest food truck painted sunshine yellow with hand-painted emerald vines dancing across its panels like something from a Monet garden. Steam hissed from the McLaren's crumpled hood while morning air filled with an surreal cocktail of burnt rubber and heavenly cinnamon roll aromatics. Harrison remained motionless for an eternal heartbeat, his perfectly sculpted obsidian hair, now disheveled like Ryan Gosling after The Notebook's rain scene, his $15,000 Tom Ford ensemble wrinkled for the first time since childhood. The food truck's serving window hung at a Picasso-esque angle, while artisanal pastries scattered across sidewalk concrete like edible confetti at the world's most expensive celebration. A hand-painted chalkboard menu lay face down in a puddle, its carefully scripted offerings of love at first bite brownies and heartbreak healing scones, now dissolving into watercolor memories. "Holy cannoli, are you breathing in there?" A voice pierced the post-collision silence, dripping with genuine human concern, rather than the calculated panic of someone witnessing automotive carnage worth millions. Harrison's head rotated toward I. The sound and time performed that peculiar magic it reserves for life's most pivotal moments: complete suspension. Standing beside her damaged culinary kingdom was a woman who appeared crafted by benevolent gods with impeccable taste and a mischievous sense of humor. Jennifer Stone possessed that rare, authentic beauty that fashion magazines spent fortunes attempting to recreate and invariably failed to capture, too. Her auburn waves cascaded in rebellious spirals that had clearly abandoned any pretense of professional styling hours earlier, with flower creating artistic highlights that would make Manhattan colorists weep with envy. Her vintage Fleetwood Mac concert tee, soft from countless washings and decorated with morning baking evidence, embraced curves suggesting both strength and femininity in perfect harmony. But her eyes, dear God, her eyes, stopped Harrison's universe from rotating. Emerald green with golden flecks, they possessed intelligence that seemed to peer straight through his expensive facade to something deeper, something he'd forgotten, existed beneath decades of boardroom battles and balance sheet victories. "I'm completely fine," Harrison managed, extracting himself from Italian leather luxury with practiced grace of someone photographed exiting vehicles since adolescence. His movements carried fluid confidence of a man accustomed to commanding rooms, filled with Fortune 500 executives, though something about this particular audience made him feel strangely, vulnerably uncertain. Jennifer surveyed the destruction with philosophical acceptance of someone who'd learned life possessed wicked timing and a twisted sense of irony. Her beloved mobile empire, her rolling kingdom for 3 years, now resembled abstract installation art more than functioning business. The collision had transformed her serving counter into modern sculpture, while her display case of award-winning pastries had become an expensive all-you-can-eat buffet for Seattle's pigeon population. "Well," she declared, crossing arms and tilting her head with that trademark smile suggesting she discovered cosmic humor in catastrophe, "I'll admit that's the most dramatic way anyone's ever requested my attention. Though fair warning, my insurance policy doesn't cover acts of ridiculously wealthy, handsome strangers." Harrison blinked as if slapped by invisible forces. She'd identified his wealth status, but not with the usual reverence or strategic calculation he'd grown accustomed to experiencing. She'd mentioned it casually, like describing someone as tall or brown-eyed. Simple factual observation devoid of worship or hidden agenda, typically accompanying recognition of his financial empire. "You recognize me?" The question escaped before his media-trained consciousness could intervene. For 15 years, since inheriting Blackthorn Industries at 17, following his parents' tragic private jet accident, Harrison had inhabited a world where his identity preceded him into every room, every conversation, every potential relationship. Jennifer's laughter bubbled up like champagne effervescence, impossible to contain and utterly intoxicating. "Sweetie, unless you've been hibernating under a rock constructed from solid platinum, it's pretty challenging to miss Harrison Blackthorn. Your face graces more magazine covers than most Hollywood A-listers. Though I must say they typically don't feature you wearing that particular 'I just obliterated someone's livelihood' expression." Her brutal honesty hit him harder than the vehicular collision. No artificial sweetness, no calculated deference, no subtle maneuvering for personal advantage. Just pure, unfiltered observation, delivered with directness that had become extinct in his universe of yes-men and social fortune hunters. "I'll compensate you for absolutely everything, naturally," Harrison responded, reaching for his phone with automatic efficiency of someone who'd resolved countless crises through numerical solutions. "My legal department can prepare comprehensive documentation within hours. Replacement value for the truck, projected lost revenue, emotional distress compensation, business interruption insurance. Shall we begin negotiations at $300,000? Jennifer's response was another laugh, this one carrying notes of genuine amusement rather than polite social lubrication. "Oh, you gorgeous, absolutely clueless man. You actually believe this is about money? This truck isn't merely my business, it's my dream on wheels, my hard-won independence, my entire universe. You cannot simply write a check and magically erase 3 years of 18-hour days and every penny I've saved since my 16th birthday." Harrison felt bedrock shifting beneath his handcrafted Italian leather shoes. Throughout his adult existence, every problem possessed a price tag. Every relationship operated under terms and conditions. Every human interaction could be quantified and resolved through financial instruments. Yet here stood this extraordinary woman, treating his billions like irrelevant wallpaper, focusing instead on intangible concepts like dreams and passion, elements he'd relegated to fairy tale territory somewhere around his 18th birthday. "Then what exactly do you want?" The question revealed more raw vulnerability than he'd displayed in years, stripping away polished veneer to expose something genuine and unguarded underneath. Jennifer studied his face with intensity of someone reading a particularly fascinating novel, her emerald eyes searching for something he wasn't certain he still possessed. "I want my truck restored by someone who understands it's not just metal and machinery, it's pure magic. I want my business back on Seattle streets serving happiness one pastry at a time. And I want absolute assurance that the person responsible for this disaster actually gives a damn about more than making problems disappear with his Black American Express card." She stepped closer, close enough that he could detect vanilla and cinnamon in her hair, close enough to see golden flecks dancing in those impossible green eyes. "I want you to prove that underneath all that designer armor and billion-dollar swagger, there's still a real human being worth knowing." For the first time in his carefully orchestrated adult life, Harrison Blackthorn, master of his universe, commander of a $12 billion empire, man who could purchase small nations before lunch, found himself completely, utterly, magnificently outmatched by a flower-dusted goddess who treated his wealth like pocket change and demanded something far more valuable than money, his authentic self. 48 hours after the collision that had rearranged both his McLaren and his worldview, Harrison found himself standing outside a cramped apartment building in Seattle's Capitol Hill district, holding a bouquet of rare Juliet roses that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who owned penthouses in 12 major cities was about to knock on a door that probably led to a space smaller than his walk-in closet. The building itself was a charming contradiction, much like its inhabitant. Vintage brick construction with fire escapes that had seen better decades, yet window boxes overflowing with herbs and flowers that suggested someone still believed in beauty despite budget constraints. It was the kind of place You've Got Mail's Kathleen Kelly might have called home. Authentic, unpretentious, and utterly foreign to Harrison's marble and crystal existence. He'd spent those 48 hours in a state of unprecedented restlessness. Board meetings had dragged like dental procedures. His usual routine of morning workouts, afternoon acquisitions, and evening networking events felt suddenly hollow, like going through motions in a play he no longer wanted to perform. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw emerald, green irises, and that maddeningly confident smile that had treated his billions like monopoly money. His private investigator had provided Jennifer's address within 6 hours, along with a dossier that read like a modern fairy tale. Culinary. School graduate who'd worked 3 jobs to pay tuition, former sous chef at a prestigious downtown restaurant who'd quit to pursue her dream of bringing gourmet comfort food to Seattle's streets. No criminal record, no scandals, no hidden agendas. Just a woman who'd built something beautiful from nothing and had the audacity to prioritize passion over profit. Well, Jennifer's voice drifted down from a second-floor window tinged with amusement. If it isn't the crash test billionaire, are those flowers supposed to be an apology or a bribe? Harrison looked up to find her leaning against the window frame, auburn hair catching afternoon sunlight like spun copper. She wore paint-splattered overalls that somehow managed to look both practical and enchanting, like Meg Ryan in French Kiss during her vineyard transformation scene. Neither, Harrison called back, surprising himself with his honesty. They're a peace offering, and possibly a plea for your time. My time? Jennifer's eyebrows arched in theatrical surprise. The man who probably bills more per minute than most people make per hour wants my time? How deliciously backwards. She disappeared from the window and Harrison heard footsteps on wooden stairs. Moments later, the building's main door swung open, revealing Jennifer in all her flower-dusted, paint-splattered, utterly captivating glory. Up close, he noticed details that had escaped him during their collision-based first meeting. The constellation of freckles across her nose, the way her left eyebrow had a small scar that gave her face character, the calluses on her hands that spoke of genuine work rather than designer manicures. You know, she said, accepting the roses with careful grace. Most people just send apology flowers through a service. They don't personally deliver museum-quality bouquets to strangers. I'm discovering that my usual approach to problem-solving might need some adjustment, Harrison admitted, the confession feeling strangely liberating, especially when dealing with someone who seems immune to conventional persuasion methods. Jennifer stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter the tiny lobby with its mismatched furniture and community bulletin board covered in local artist announcements. Conventional persuasion methods? Is that what we're calling throwing money at things until they go away? That's... Harrison paused, recognizing the uncomfortable accuracy of her assessment. That's how I've operated for most of my adult life. Yes? Well, congratulations, Jennifer said, leading him up narrow stairs that creaked with each step. You've just met your first problem that can't be solved with a platinum card and a team of lawyers. Her apartment was a revelation, a tiny space transformed into something magical through creativity and love. Every square inch served multiple purposes. A vintage trunk doubled as coffee table and storage. Bookshelves were built into alcoves that might have been architectural afterthoughts, and the kitchen was so efficiently organized it would make professional chefs weep with envy. Sunlight streamed through windows she'd obviously spent hours making spotless, illuminating walls covered with photographs, artwork, and what appeared to be handwritten recipes in multiple languages. It was the polar opposite of his sterile, professionally decorated spaces and somehow infinitely more appealing. This is, Harrison began, then stopped, realizing that his usual vocabulary of impressive and well-appointed seemed inadequate. Small, cramped, not exactly what you're accustomed to, Jennifer suggested, settling the roses into a mason jar with practiced efficiency. Beautiful, Harrison finished quietly. It's absolutely beautiful. It feels like someone actually lives here. Jennifer's hand stilled on the flower stems, and when she looked at him, something in her expression had shifted. The defensive humor was still there, but underneath it he glimpsed surprise, as if she hadn't expected genuine appreciation from him. Thank you, she said simply. I've worked hard to make it home. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and Harrison realized this was the longest he'd gone without checking his phone in years. The constant digital demands of his empire seemed suddenly irrelevant compared to the woman arranging flowers with the same care most people reserved for precious artifacts. "So," Jennifer said, settling onto her vintage sofa and curling her legs underneath her like a cat finding the perfect sunny spot, "what exactly brings Harrison Blackthorne to my humble corner of the world? And please don't say it's just about the truck." Harrison remained standing, partly because the available seating looked antique enough to be valuable and partly because pacing helped him think. "I want to make this right. Not just the truck. Everything. But you made it clear that money isn't the solution you're looking for." "Gold star for listening skills," Jennifer said dryly. "Continue." "I've been thinking about what you said. About proving there's still a real person underneath the, what did you call it? Designer armor and billion-dollar swagger." Harrison found himself smiling at the memory. "I have a proposition." "Oh, this should be good." Jennifer leaned forward, chin propped on her hand with the attention of someone settling in for quality entertainment. "Let me guess, you want to write me a check for $1 million and call it even? I want to work for you." The words hung in the air like a soap bubble, delicate, impossible, and somehow perfect. Jennifer's expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and what might have been the beginning of laughter. "I'm sorry. What now?" "I want to work for you," Harrison repeated, the idea gaining momentum as he spoke. "Help you rebuild your business, not as a benefactor or investor but as an employee. I'll do whatever needs doing. Construction, painting, cooking, cleaning, serving customers. Minimum wage, no special treatment, no shortcuts." Jennifer stared at him as if he'd just announced his intention to join the circus. "You want to work for me?" Harrison Blackthorne, who probably hasn't performed manual labor since summer camp, wants to work in food service for $7.25 an hour. $15 an hour, Harrison corrected automatically. Seattle's minimum wage is $15. "Oh my God, you're serious." Jennifer stood up, beginning to pace in the small space with barely contained energy. "You're actually serious about this completely insane idea?" "It's not insane," Harrison protested, though he was beginning to wonder if it might be exactly that. "It's practical. You need help rebuilding your business, and I need to learn what it means to earn something through actual work rather than inherited wealth and financial manipulation." Jennifer stopped pacing and fixed him with a stare that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Why? Why would you possibly want to subject yourself to that kind of ordinary existence?" Harrison met her gaze and for the first time in years decided to tell someone the complete truth. "Because for 48 hours I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Not because you're beautiful, though you are, devastatingly so, but because you looked at me and saw someone worth challenging. You demanded I prove I'm more than just a bank account with good genetics. And the terrifying thing is, I'm not sure I can. But I want to try." The silence that followed was so complete Harrison could hear his own heartbeat. Jennifer's expression had gone from amused skepticism to something deeper. Surprise, curiosity, and perhaps the faintest hint of possibility. "1 month," she said, finally. "What?" "1 month. You work for me for 1 month, no special treatment, no calling daddy's lawyers when things get difficult. You show up every day, you do what I tell you to do, and you earn every penny of your paycheck. If you can prove you're more than just another privileged pretty boy playing at being normal, then maybe, we can talk about what comes next." Harrison felt something electric shoot through his chest, part terror, part exhilaration. "Deal. But if you quit, if you complain, if you so much as hint that this is beneath you, then you pay for my truck replacement, and we never see each other again. Understood?" "Understood." Harrison extended his hand for a shake, and when Jennifer's fingers touched his, he felt that same electric current multiply tenfold. "Welcome to the real world, Mr. Blackthorne," Jennifer said with a smile that was equal parts challenge and invitation. "Try not to let it kill you." Harrison Blackthorne stood at 5:47 a.m. outside, Sunrise Auto Body and Custom Restoration, clutching a venti Pike Place roast and staring at what remained of Jennifer's food truck, with the expression of a man who just realized he might have bitten off considerably more than he could chew. The vehicle looked like it had been through a war zone, which he supposed it had. 3 days had passed since their handshake agreement, and Jennifer had wasted no time putting her new employee to work. She'd texted him an address, a time, and a single instruction. Wear clothes you can ruin, preferably clothes that cost less than most people's cars. Finding such clothes had proven surprisingly challenging for a man whose casual wear typically bore Italian designer labels. After an awkward expedition to Target, his first visit to any store that didn't require appointments, Harrison had assembled what he hoped passed for normal work attire: jeans that felt foreign against his skin, steel-toed boots that made him walk like he was learning to use his feet, and a plain gray t-shirt that cost less than his usual tip at Starbucks. Well, Jennifer's voice carried across the auto shop's parking lot, tinged with the kind of amusement that suggested she was enjoying this far more than she should. Look who actually showed up, and only 3 minutes late, practically punctual by billionaire standards. She emerged from behind the truck wearing coveralls that had seen serious action, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that somehow managed to highlight the elegant curve of her neck. Even covered in grease and wielding a wrench like a weapon, she possessed that effortless beauty that made Harrison's carefully curated world seem suddenly artificial. "I brought coffee," Harrison offered, extending the Starbucks cup like a peace offering. Jennifer accepted it with a raised eyebrow. "Venti Pike Place, extra shot, splash of cream, no sugar. Either you have an excellent memory, or you've been stalking my coffee preferences." "I asked your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, what you usually order when you stop by the cafe downstairs," Harrison admitted, realizing too late how that might sound. "You asked my neighbor about my coffee order?" Jennifer's expression cycled through surprise, suspicion, and what might have been reluctant appreciation. "That's either really sweet or mildly creepy. I haven't decided which." "I was hoping for sweet," Harrison said, surprising himself with his honesty. "I've never had to learn someone's preferences before. Usually I just assume people will adapt to mine." Jennifer studied his face over the rim of her coffee cup, and Harrison felt that familiar sensation of being evaluated by someone who could see past his usual defenses. "Well, points for effort. And the coffee is perfect, so bonus points for execution." She gestured toward the mangled truck with the casual air of a general surveying a battlefield. "Meet your new office, Mr. Minimum Wage. This is Beatrice. Don't ask why I name my vehicles, it's a quirk. And she's currently more abstract art than functional food service." Harrison circled the truck slowly, taking inventory of the damage, with the same methodical approach he'd used to evaluate potential acquisitions. The collision had been thorough in its destruction: crumpled panels, shattered glass, twisted metal that would require complete reconstruction. It was, he realized, going to be genuinely difficult work. "So," he said, turning back to Jennifer with what he hoped passed for confidence, "where do we start?" "We don't start anywhere," Jennifer corrected with a smile that was pure mischief. "You start by stripping all the damaged panels off the truck. Every piece of bent metal, every shard of broken glass, every component that can't be salvaged. There's a dumpster over there. Safety equipment is in that toolbox. And if you have questions, ask Miguel." She pointed toward a man in his 50s, who was working on a classic Mustang with the focused intensity of a surgeon. "Miguel's been restoring vehicles longer than you've been alive, and he's graciously agreed to supervise your education in honest labor." "Where will you be?" Harrison asked, and immediately regretted the question when Jennifer's smile turned positively wicked. "Running my business, or rather, running what's left of it while you prove whether you're serious about this little experiment." She pulled out her phone, checking messages with the efficiency of someone juggling multiple priorities. "I've got meetings with insurance adjusters, suppliers to reschedule, and 3 catering events this week that I need to fulfill somehow. You know, the unglamorous work of actually keeping a business alive." The casual way she dismissed his presence stung more than Harrison expected. In his world, His attention was a valuable commodity that people competed for. Here, Jennifer was treating him like any other temporary employee, which, he supposed, was exactly what he'd asked for. "Miguel," Jennifer called out in fluent Spanish, engaging in a rapid conversation that Harrison's prep school foreign language classes couldn't quite follow. Whatever she said made Miguel laugh and nod approvingly in Harrison's direction. "What did you tell him?" Harrison asked. "That you're my new intern, you've never done real work before, and he should treat you exactly like any other rookie." Jennifer's grin was pure sunshine mixed with trouble. "Also that you're paying him $50 if you quit before lunch." "You bet against me? On my first day?" "Honey, I didn't bet against you. I bet on human nature. Most people who've never faced genuine physical labor don't last 4 hours when they realize their manicure is going to suffer." Harrison looked down at his hands, soft, pale, professionally maintained hands that had never held anything heavier than a Mont Blanc pen. The irony wasn't lost on him that these same hands had signed deals worth billions, but were about to be defeated by manual labor. "Miguel," Jennifer called again, this time in English. "Meet Harrison, he's all yours. Try not to let him hurt himself too badly. I need him functional for at least a week." Miguel approached with the unhurried gait of someone who'd seen every type of rookie mistake imaginable. His handshake could have crushed walnuts, and his dark eyes held decades of experience mixed with gentle amusement. "So," Miguel said, his accent carrying the warmth of someone who'd learned English as a labor of love rather than academic requirement. "The rich boy wants to learn about real work, eh?" "Something like that," Harrison replied, appreciating the man's directness. "Bueno, first lesson. This truck, she's not just metal and paint. She's someone's dreams, someone's livelihood. You treat her with respect and maybe you learn something about yourself too." Miguel handed him a pair of work gloves that looked like they'd survived several construction projects. "Put these on. Your hands, they're going to hate you for the next few days." As Harrison pulled on the gloves, he caught Jennifer watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not mockery, not pity, but something more complex. Curiosity mixed with challenge, as if she was genuinely interested in what version of himself he might discover under all that privilege. "One more thing," she said, stepping closer until he could smell that intoxicating mixture of vanilla and cinnamon that seemed to follow her everywhere. "This isn't a movie montage where you'll magically become good at this overnight. Real work is hard, repetitive, and often thankless. Your back will ache, your hands will bleed, and you'll probably question every decision that led you here. The only thing that matters is whether you keep showing up." She started to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Harrison, when you inevitably want to complain about how beneath you this all is, remember, you asked for this. You wanted to prove you're more than just a trust fund with good cheekbones. This is your chance." With that, she disappeared into the auto shop's office, leaving Harrison alone with Miguel in a truck that looked like it had been attacked by a very expensive, very angry McLaren. "She's something else, that one," Miguel observed, following Harrison's gaze. "Smart, tough, doesn't take shit from anybody. You picked a good one to impress, but also a hard one." "Is it that obvious?" Harrison asked. Miguel laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "Mijo, I've been married 32 years. I know what a man looks like when he's trying to win a woman who's worth the effort." He gestured toward the truck. "Now come on. Let's see if those soft hands can learn to build something instead of just signing checks." Harrison picked up his first tool, a pry bar that felt alien in his grip, and approached the truck's damaged side panel. As he positioned the bar and applied pressure, feeling metal resist and then suddenly give way with a screech of protest, he realized Jennifer was absolutely right. This was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever done. And for the first time in his life, that felt like exactly what he needed. Day 7 of Harrison Blackthorne's crash course in reality arrived with Seattle's signature drizzle, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion he'd never experienced in his climate-controlled, ergonomically optimized world. His reflection in the auto shop's grimy bathroom mirror revealed a man he barely recognized, stubble that wasn't artfully styled, hair that defied expensive products, and hands that looked like they'd been through a wood chipper. The past week had been a symphony of small humiliations and surprising discoveries. He'd learned that removing rusted bolts required patience he didn't possess, that his back could ache in ways that made sitting in boardroom chairs feel like medieval torture, and that Miguel's seemingly endless supply of colorful Spanish curses was actually quite educational when properly contextualized. More importantly, he'd learned that Jennifer Stone was even more remarkable than he'd initially realized, and infinitely more stubborn about maintaining professional distance. "Buenos dias, sunshine," Miguel called out as Harrison limped through the shop's entrance, moving like a man 3 times his age. "You look like hammered shit. This is progress." "I feel like hammered shit," Harrison replied, accepting the cup of coffee Miguel extended with hands that were developing an impressive collection of cuts and calluses. "But I'm still standing." "Barely," Miguel observed with amusement. "Yesterday I thought you might cry when that panel cutter slipped and took skin with it." Harrison flexed his bandaged thumb, remembering the moment when pristine billionaire flesh had met unforgiving reality. The cut itself had been minor, but the shock of actual physical consequence, blood, pain, the possibility of scarring, had rattled him more than any market crash or hostile takeover. "Where's Jennifer?" Harrison asked, noticing her absence with the kind of acute awareness that suggested his feelings had evolved well beyond professional respect. "Catering event downtown. Some fancy hotel thing for tech executives." Miguel's tone carried subtle irony. "Your people, I think." The reminder of his other life hit Harrison with unexpected force. His assistant had been sending increasingly frantic emails about missed meetings, postponed acquisitions, and board members demanding explanations for his absence. The Blackthorn Industries stock price had actually fluctuated based on rumors about his mysterious disappearance from public view. "She's been avoiding me," Harrison said, the admission escaping before his pride could intervene. Miguel looked up from the transmission he was rebuilding, dark eyes holding the kind of wisdom that came from decades of observing human nature. "You think?" "I know. We've barely exchanged 10 words that weren't directly work-related. Every time I try to talk to her about anything else, she finds urgent business elsewhere." "Maybe," Miguel suggested with the patience of a man who'd raised 4 daughters, "she's protecting herself." "From what?" "From you, mijo. From what you represent." Miguel wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "You think this is just about proving you can do manual labor? Jennifer's watching a billionaire play at being normal, knowing that when you get bored or tired or remember how comfortable your real life is, you'll disappear back to your penthouse and she'll be left with whatever damage you've done to her heart." The accuracy of Miguel's assessment felt like a punch to the solar plexus. Harrison had been so focused on proving himself worthy that he'd failed to consider Jennifer's perspective. The very real risk she was taking by allowing him into her world, even temporarily. "What if I don't want to go back?" Harrison asked, quietly. "Then you better figure out how to convince her you're serious, and not with money or grand gestures, but with the kind of consistency that proves character." Miguel gestured toward the truck, which was beginning to resemble something functional again after a week of intensive restoration. "Real change, it's like rebuilding this truck. You can't just slap some paint over the damage and call it fixed. You have to strip everything down to the foundation and build it back up piece by piece." Harrison was contemplating this automotive metaphor for personal transformation when the shop's entrance bell chimed with unusual urgency. 3 men in expensive suits entered like they owned whatever space they occupied, a bearing Harrison recognized because he'd perfected it himself. Harrison Blackthorn, the leader, a silver-haired man with the predatory confidence of a corporate shark, stepped forward. "I'm Richard Pemberton, chairman of the Blackthorn Industries board. We need to talk." The temperature in the shop seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harrison felt Miguel's attention sharpen beside him, though the older man continued working with studied casualness. This was Harrison's world intruding on the sanctuary he'd been building, and the contrast was jarring. "Gentlemen," Harrison said, falling back into the polished persona that felt increasingly foreign. "I wasn't expecting company. Clearly." Pemberton's gaze swept over Harrison's work clothes with barely concealed disgust. "We've been trying to reach you for days. Do you have any idea what your absence is doing to company confidence? The stock price has dropped 12% based on speculation about your mental state." "My mental state is fine, Richard. I'm taking some personal time." "Personal time?" Another board member, James Crawford, stepped forward with the righteous indignation of someone protecting his investment portfolio. "You've been missing board meetings, skipping investor calls, and apparently playing mechanic while the company hemorrhages value. This isn't personal time. This is professional negligence." Harrison felt the familiar weight of expectations and obligations settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. These men had helped run his empire for years, had trusted him with billions in shareholder value, had treated him as the golden boy who could do no wrong. Their disappointment was palpable, and he had to admit, not entirely unjustified. "I understand your concerns," Harrison began, but Pemberton cut him off. "Do you? Because from where we're standing, it looks like you've had some kind of breakdown and decided to cosplay as a working-class hero. The board is prepared to invoke the mental competency clause in your contract if necessary." The threat hung in the air like smog. Harrison knew exactly what that meant. A forced psychological evaluation, potential removal from his position, the complete dismantling of the autonomy he'd fought to maintain since inheriting the company at 17. "That won't be necessary," Harrison said carefully. "I'll be back in the office next week." "You'll be back tomorrow," Crawford corrected. "We have the Morrison acquisition to finalize, the quarterly reports to review, and a full damage control campaign to launch. Whatever this phase is, it ends now." Harrison opened his mouth to respond when another voice cut through the tension, like a blade. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but this is a working auto shop, not a corporate boardroom." Jennifer stood in the doorway, still wearing her catering uniform, black slacks, white blouse, hair pulled back in professional efficiency, but radiating the kind of quiet authority that made the expensive suits suddenly seem like costumes. She moved with purposeful grace, setting down a box of what appeared to be leftover pastries before turning her full attention to the unwanted visitors. "I'm Jennifer Stone, and you're trespassing on private property," she continued, her voice carrying the kind of polite steel that suggested these men had seriously underestimated their audience. Pemberton barely glanced at her, dismissing her presence with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to irrelevance from anyone outside his social sphere. "This doesn't concern you, miss. We're here on urgent business with Mr. Blackthorne." "Actually, it concerns me quite a bit since Mr. Blackthorne is my employee and you're disrupting his workday." Jennifer's smile could have cut glass. "Perhaps you'd like to schedule an appointment during his off hours?" The suggestion that Harrison Blackthorne, billionaire CEO, was anyone's employee clearly struck the board members as either comedy or insanity. Crawford actually laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Employee? Do you have any idea who you're talking to? This man controls a $12 billion empire. He doesn't work for anyone, least of all." His gaze swept over Jennifer with obvious condescension. "What exactly is your business here? Food service?" The insult landed with surgical precision, and Harrison felt something dangerous ignite in his chest. These men, who had never created anything more substantial than financial projections, were dismissing Jennifer's achievements with the casual cruelty of people who measured worth exclusively in stock portfolios. "Yes," Jennifer replied with a calm that would have impressed Buddhist monks. "I own and operate a gourmet food business. I create something people actually need, something that brings joy to their daily lives. It's honest work, which I realize might be a foreign concept in your circles." The silence that followed was so complete Harrison could hear his own heartbeat. Pemberton's face had gone an alarming shade of red, while Crawford looked like he'd been slapped with a particularly expensive fish. "Harrison," Pemberton said, his voice carrying the kind of barely controlled fury that preceded career-ending decisions, "I'm going to give you exactly 30 seconds to remember who you are and what you owe to the people who've supported your leadership. After that, we're calling an emergency board meeting to discuss your fitness for duty." Harrison looked around the auto shop, at Miguel pretending to work while obviously listening to every word, at Jennifer standing with quiet dignity in the face of calculated insult, at the truck they'd been rebuilding together piece by careful piece. Then he looked at the three men who represented everything he'd been raised to become, everything he'd thought he wanted to be. For the first time in his life, the choice was crystal clear. "Gentlemen," Harrison said, his voice carrying a certainty that surprised even him, "you can schedule that board meeting for next month. I still have 3 weeks left on my current employment contract, and I intend to honor it." The explosion of outraged protests from the three board members created a cacophony that would have impressed a heavy metal concert. But Harrison wasn't listening anymore. He was watching Jennifer's face, seeing surprise give way to something that might have been respect and possibly, just possibly, the beginning of something deeper. The Seattle Times headline screamed across Harrison's phone screen like a digital slap. "Blackthorn heir suffers apparent breakdown. Board questions billionaire's mental fitness." Below it, a paparazzi photo showed him in his work clothes, looking exhausted and disheveled outside the auto shop, with the devastating caption, "From boardroom to backroom, Harrison Blackthorn's fall from grace." 2 days had passed since the board's ambush, and the media feeding frenzy had reached Pretty Woman levels of class warfare spectacle. Financial news networks were running hourly updates on Blackthorn Industries' stock price, which had plummeted 23%. Social media buzzed with theories ranging from secret gambling addiction to clandestine romance with a mystery working-class woman. Harrison sat in Jennifer's truck, fully restored now, gleaming like a yellow jewel in the morning sun, reading the character assassination with the detached fascination of someone watching his own public execution. The irony wasn't lost on him that the most authentic he'd ever felt was being portrayed as evidence of mental instability. "Stop torturing yourself," Jennifer said, sliding into the driver's seat with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of determined cheerfulness that suggested she was fighting her own demons. Social media trolls and financial reporters aren't exactly known for their psychological expertise. She was right, but the damage extended beyond hurt feelings. His assistant had called twice that morning with increasingly desperate updates. Major investors demanding explanations, pending deals threatening to collapse, and a shareholders' meeting scheduled for Friday, where his fitness for leadership would be formally challenged. "My lawyers think I should return immediately," Harrison said, accepting the coffee with hands that had finally stopped looking like they belonged to a pampered prince. "Issue a statement about taking temporary personal leave for health reasons. Resume normal operations. Let the stock price recover." "But?" Jennifer's tone suggested she already knew there was a but. "But that would mean abandoning everything we've built here. The truck, the work, the..." He gestured vaguely between them, not quite ready to name what was growing in that space. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, watching pedestrians hurry past through rain-speckled windows. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested this conversation had been building for days. "Harrison, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." The seriousness in her tone made his stomach clench. "Okay. I've been offered a job, executive chef position at Marcus Henderson's new restaurant downtown. Full benefits, salary that's triple what I make with the truck, opportunity to build a real culinary reputation." She turned to face him, and he saw something that looked like regret in those incredible green eyes. "It's everything I've worked toward for years." Harrison felt the world tilt sideways. Marcus Henderson was Seattle's most acclaimed restaurateur, a man who turned unknown chefs into culinary celebrities. The offer represented the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, if at all. That's incredible," Harrison managed, forcing enthusiasm he didn't feel. "You have to take it." "Do I?" Jennifer's laugh held no humor. "Because accepting means giving up the truck, giving up my independence, giving up the dream I've been building one pastry at a time for 3 years." "But it's Marcus Henderson. This could change your entire life." "Yes," Jennifer agreed quietly. "The question is whether I want that particular change." They sat in silence, while rain drummed against the truck's roof like nature's own percussion section. Harrison realized they were both facing the same impossible choice: security and success in their established worlds, or the uncertain path they'd been building together. "There's something else," Jennifer continued, her voice even quieter now. "The job offer came with some interesting information about how Marcus learned about my work. Apparently, someone's been making inquiries about me, asking about my business model, my financial situation, my personal relationships." Harrison felt ice form in his veins. "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind that come with non-disclosure agreements and very expensive hourly rates." Jennifer's eyes met his with laser focus. "The kind that billionaires use when they want comprehensive background checks on people who might pose threats to their interests." The accusation hung between them like a toxic cloud. Harrison's mind raced through possibilities, but the most obvious explanation was also the most damning. Someone from his world had been investigating Jennifer, possibly to find leverage against him, or to understand what hold this working-class woman had over the Blackthorn heir. "Jennifer, I swear to you, I never—" "Didn't you?" Jennifer's voice carried the kind of hurt that cut deeper than anger. "Because it would be so convenient, wouldn't it? Your board is pressuring you to return, your stock price is tanking, and suddenly the woman complicating your life gets offered her dream job in another city. Problem solved, billionaire returns to his proper place, and everyone wins." "That's not what this is," Harrison protested. But even as he said it, he could see how perfectly the pieces fit together. Remove the distraction, restore the status quo, eliminate the threat to shareholder value. "Isn't it?" Jennifer's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "You know what the most pathetic part is? For a few days, I actually started to believe you might be different. That maybe underneath all that privilege and entitlement there was someone real worth caring about." She started the truck's engine with more force than necessary, the rumble drowning out Harrison's attempt to respond. "I think it's time for you to go home, Harrison. Back to your real life, your real responsibilities, your real world where people, like me, are just temporary entertainment." "Jennifer, please, get out." Her voice was quiet but final. "Get out of my truck, get out of my business, and get out of my life. Consider your month of slumming successfully completed." Harrison sat frozen for a heartbeat, searching her face for any sign that she might listen to reason. But Jennifer had already rebuilt her walls, stronger and higher than before. The woman who'd challenged him to be better was gone, replaced by someone who'd been hurt once too often by people who treated her world as a tourist destination. He climbed out of the truck slowly, each movement feeling like another nail in a coffin he'd apparently built without realizing it. As Jennifer drove away without looking back, Harrison stood in the rain, watching his chance at something real disappear into Seattle traffic. His phone buzzed with another urgent message from his assistant, another crisis requiring his immediate attention, another reminder of the life waiting for him to stop playing games and resume his proper role. The easy path lay ahead. Return to the penthouse, issue the appropriate statements, let the stock price recover, and pretend this interlude had never happened. But as Harrison walked toward his own car, a modest Honda he'd bought to blend in, now feeling like a costume he was ready to discard, he realized something fundamental had changed. For 3 weeks he'd tasted what it meant to earn something through honest work, to be valued for effort rather than inheritance, to be challenged by someone who saw past his bank account to whatever lay beneath. The old Harrison would have retreated to familiar comfort, would have let his lawyers craft explanations and his board dictate decisions. But that Harrison had never met Jennifer Stone, had never learned that some things couldn't be bought or inherited or negotiated into existence. Some things had to be fought for. Harrison pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd avoided for days. When his head of security answered on the first ring, Harrison's voice carried a determination that surprised even him. "Marcus, it's Harrison. I need you to trace some financial transactions for me. Someone's been conducting unauthorized background investigations, and I want to know who's been pulling the strings." 2 hours later, Harrison had his answer, and it was worse than he'd imagined. The investigation hadn't been ordered by his board or his competitors or anyone from his corporate world. It had been commissioned by his own head of legal affairs, acting on standing instructions to monitor and neutralize any personal entanglements that might compromise Harrison's business judgment or public image. The same protocols that had quietly ended his previous relationships, discouraged unsuitable friendships, and maintained the pristine isolation that wealth demanded. His own people had been sabotaging his chance at happiness, and he'd been too blind to see it. But he could see it now, and for the first time in his carefully orchestrated life, Harrison Blackthorne was going to fight back. The war for his soul was about to begin, and he finally knew which side he was on. The Blackthorne Industries emergency shareholders meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Friday that felt like the end of the world. By 1:47 p.m., Harrison had already fired his head of legal affairs, dissolved the protocols that had been manipulating his personal life, and prepared what would either be the most inspired speech of his career or his final act as CEO. He stood outside the conference room where his fate would be decided, wearing the same work clothes he'd been living in for 3 weeks. Jeans, with honest dirt, boots that had earned their scuffs, and a flannel shirt that Jennifer had once said made his eyes look less like Arctic ice and more like summer sky. If the board wanted to question his mental fitness based on his wardrobe choices, so be it. "Sir," his assistant whispered urgently, "the shareholders are already asking questions about my presentation. Perhaps we could delay another hour so you could change into something more appropriate?" "No," Harrison said with a calm that surprised him. "This is who I am now. They can take it or leave it." Through the conference room's glass walls he could see the assembled power brokers who controlled his company's destiny, pension fund managers, investment bankers, old money aristocrats who measured worth exclusively in quarterly returns. Richard Pemberton stood at the head of the table like a general, preparing for battle, his presentation slides already loaded with damning evidence of Harrison's erratic behavior. But Harrison wasn't looking at them. His attention was fixed on the back corner of the room where Miguel sat in his best suit, a 20-year-old Navy number that had probably seen more weddings than board meetings, looking profoundly uncomfortable, but determinedly present. Harrison had personally invited him as a character witness, though he wasn't sure the board would appreciate testimony from an auto mechanic about leadership qualities learned through honest labor. What Harrison hadn't expected was the woman, sitting beside Miguel, her auburn hair cascading over shoulders draped in a vintage dress that somehow managed to look both elegant and authentically her. Jennifer Stone was there in his corporate stronghold, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else but refusing to abandon whatever principles had brought her. Their eyes met through the glass, and Harrison felt his carefully prepared speech evaporate into irrelevance. Everything he'd planned to say about corporate responsibility and authentic leadership suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the simple fact that she'd shown up. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pemberton's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "we're here to address concerns about Mr. Blackthorne's recent behavior and its impact on shareholder value. Over the past month, his absence from leadership duties has cost this company nearly $2 billion in market capitalization." Harrison entered the room as Pemberton clicked to his first slide, a graph showing Blackthorne Industries stock decline with all the subtlety of a cardiac monitor flatline. Murmurs rippled through the assembled shareholders, a mixture of concern and barely concealed greed that Harrison recognized as the soundtrack of his entire professional life. "Mr. Blackthorne," Pemberton continued with prosecutorial precision, "would you care to explain to these investors why you've abandoned your fiduciary responsibilities to play mechanic with—" His gaze flicked dismissively toward Miguel and Jennifer. "Blue-collar entertainment?" The insult landed exactly as intended, not just at Harrison but at the people who'd taught him what real work meant. Harrison felt something crystallize in his chest, a clarity he'd never experienced in any boardroom negotiation. "Actually, Richard, I'd be happy to explain." Harrison moved to the front of the room with the confident stride of someone who'd finally figured out what he was fighting for. "But first, I think it's important that everyone understands what's really been happening here." He gestured toward the slides showing financial projections and market analyses. "These numbers tell a story about corporate performance and shareholder returns, but they don't tell the story about why I've been absent, or what I've learned during that absence, or why that learning might be the most valuable thing this company has gained in years." Harrison looked directly at Jennifer, drawing strength from her presence even as he prepared to risk everything. 3 weeks ago, I destroyed someone's livelihood through my own carelessness and arrogance. Instead of simply writing a check to make the problem disappear, my usual approach, I was challenged to actually fix what I'd broken, to work for my redemption instead of purchasing it. Pemberton's expression suggested he was watching a mental breakdown in real time. Harrison, with all due respect, this is hardly relevant to— It's completely relevant, Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying an authority that silenced the room. Because in those 3 weeks I learned more about leadership, responsibility, and creating actual value than I had in 15 years of inherited corporate power. He turned to address the shareholders directly, abandoning his prepared remarks for something far more dangerous: the truth. How many of you have ever built something with your own hands? How many have created value through personal effort rather than financial manipulation? How many have earned respect through character rather than inherited it through circumstances? The silence that followed was profound. These were people accustomed to measuring success through stock options and quarterly dividends, not through calloused hands and honest sweat. Miguel Ramirez, Harrison continued, gesturing toward the mechanic who looked like he'd rather face down a grizzly bear than a room full of billionaires, taught me that real leadership means understanding every aspect of the work you're asking others to do. Jennifer Stone showed me that authentic success comes from creating something people actually need, something that improves their daily lives in measurable ways. Jennifer's eyes widened as Harrison placed her at the center of his corporate confession, but he wasn't finished. This company has been profitable for decades because we've been very good at buying, selling, and manipulating existing assets. But when was the last time we actually created something new? When did we last build rather than acquire? When did we last consider our impact on communities rather than just quarterly reports? Harrison pulled up his own presentation. Photos from the auto shop, before and after shots of Jennifer's truck, images of actual work being done by actual people. This is what I've been doing for 3 weeks, learning what it means to fix something that's broken, to create value through effort, to earn trust through consistency rather than inheritance. The room stirred with uncomfortable energy. This wasn't the kind of business presentation these people expected, and Harrison could see calculation in their eyes. Was this inspired leadership or confirmation of mental instability? The stock price has dropped because markets fear uncertainty, Harrison continued, and my absence created uncertainty. But I'm proposing something that should excite every long-term investor in this room: a fundamental shift towards sustainable value creation rather than short-term profit extraction. Pemberton stepped forward with the expression of someone playing a winning hand. Harrison, this is all very inspiring, but shareholders want results, not philosophy. Your romantic notions about honest labor don't change the fact that you've cost this company billions through irresponsible behavior. Have I? Harrison smiled, and for the first time in the meeting, he felt like he was playing his own game rather than reacting to someone else's rules. Marcus, would you bring up the Chen Industries file? His assistant, looking puzzled but obedient, pulled up documents on the main screen. Harrison had spent the previous night working through files he'd ignored for weeks, and what he'd found was better than he'd dared hope. While I was learning about real work, our development team finalized the breakthrough on sustainable battery technology that we've been pursuing for 3 years. The patents were approved yesterday, and preliminary market analysis suggests this could revolutionize electric vehicle production. Harrison's smile widened as he watched the room's energy shift. Conservative estimates put the licensing value at $15 billion over the next 5 years. The silence was different. Now, not confusion or concern, but the predatory attention of investors sensing opportunity. Furthermore, Harrison continued, my absence from day-to-day operations allowed our department heads to demonstrate initiative and innovation without constant micromanagement. Productivity and R&D increased by 37%, and we've had breakthrough developments in 3 separate projects. Pemberton's face had gone through several color changes, settling on an unhealthy gray that suggested his coup attempt was crumbling in real time. But here's the most important thing I learned, Harrison said, his voice dropping to something more personal, more genuine. Success without purpose is just expensive emptiness. Wealth without character is just numbers on a screen. And leadership, without understanding the work you're leading, is just privileged incompetence. He looked directly at Jennifer, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but also something that might have been pride. I'm proposing that Blackthorn Industries embrace a new model, one where we create genuine value, where we understand the communities we operate in, where we measure success not just in quarterly profits but in positive impact. And I'm proposing that we start by investing in small businesses that embody these values. Harrison pulled up his final slide, a detailed business plan for a network of gourmet food trucks, starting with Jennifer's operation and expanding citywide. Mobile culinary enterprises that serve underserved communities, provide employment, opportunities, and create genuine social value while generating sustainable returns. The room erupted in discussion as shareholders began calculating the potential of this unexpected opportunity. But Harrison wasn't watching them anymore. He was watching Jennifer, who had tears in her eyes and her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. The motion before this board, Harrison concluded, is not whether I'm fit to lead this company, but whether this company is ready to be led toward something better than what we've always been. The vote, when it came, was unanimous in Harrison's favor. The sustainable battery patents alone were enough to silence any concerns about short-term stock fluctuations, and the food truck investment program was generating excitement among shareholders who'd been looking for socially responsible investment opportunities. But Harrison barely heard the results. He was already moving through the crowd toward the woman who'd changed his life by refusing to be impressed by it. "Jennifer," he said when he finally reached her, aware that the entire room was watching but no longer caring about corporate protocol. "I need to tell you something." "Harrison," she began, but he gently interrupted. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than any merger negotiation or acquisition deal he'd ever closed. "Not because you're beautiful, though. You are devastatingly so. And not because you challenge me, though you do in the most wonderful ways. I love you because you showed me who I could be when I stopped trying to be who I thought I should be." Jennifer's tears were flowing freely now, and her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "You magnificent, impossible man. Do you have any idea what you just did in there?" "I told the truth," Harrison said, reaching up to wipe a tear from her cheek with a thumb that bore honest calluses. "For the first time in my adult life, I told the complete truth about what matters." "And what matters?" Jennifer asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "You," Harrison said without hesitation. "Building something real with you. Creating a life that's about more than just accumulating wealth. Learning what it means to earn something worth having." Jennifer rose on her toes and kissed him then, in front of assembled billionaires and board members and financial reporters. A kiss that tasted like cinnamon and vanilla, and the promise of everything he'd never known he wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Miguel appeared beside them with a grin that could have powered the city. "So," the mechanic said with satisfaction, "I guess the rich boy learned something after all." "I learned everything," Harrison replied, his arm around Jennifer's waist as if he never intended to let her go again. "I learned that the best things in life can't be bought or inherited or negotiated into existence. They have to be earned through showing up, doing the work, and proving you're worthy of them." Jennifer leaned into his embrace, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. "For the record, you proved that about 3 weeks ago. I was just too scared to believe it." "And now?" Harrison asked, though her presence in his corporate stronghold had already given him the answer. "Now I'm thinking that maybe dreams are more flexible than I thought. Maybe the perfect life isn't about choosing between security and passion, but about finding someone worth building something new with." "Is that a yes to the food truck empire proposal?" Harrison asked with mock seriousness. "That's a yes to everything," Jennifer replied, her smile containing all the promise of their uncertain, wonderful future. "But you're still doing the dishes, As laughter erupted from the shareholders behind them, people beginning to understand that they'd just witnessed something far more valuable than a successful board meeting, Harrison realized that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he belonged. He'd spent 32 years accumulating wealth, power, and influence, but it had taken a flower-dusted goddess with emerald eyes and a damaged food truck to teach him the most important lesson of all. The richest man in the UB world was the one who'd found something worth more than money, and he was holding her in his arms. 6 months later, the first Jennifer's Gourmet Dreams truck rolled through downtown Seattle, followed by a convoy of 5 more, each one restored to perfection by Harrison's own hands during weekend work sessions that had become legendary among their friends. The business was thriving. Harrison had learned to make a decent cinnamon roll, and Miguel had been promoted to chief of operations for what the financial press had dubbed the most successful small business investment in corporate history. But the real success story was simpler and more profound. A billionaire who'd learned that the best return on investment was love, and a woman who'd discovered that sometimes the most unlikely people could become exactly who you needed them to be. Their wedding was held in the auto shop where it all began, officiated by Miguel and catered entirely by food trucks. The stock price hit an all-time high the following Monday. Some stories, it turned out, really could have it all. The end.